Whispers of the Ancients series, Civilizations of Africa. Episode 9, The Kingdom of Zimbabwe. Masters of stone approximately 1100 to 1450 CE, in the heart of southern Africa, where rolling savannas kiss iron-red soil, where the wind whispers through granite boulders stacked like forgotten giants, there stands a mystery, hewn in stone walls without mortar, monuments without name. Great Zimbabwe, cradle of kings and cattle, trade and truth, the echo of an African empire, carved not in gold but in granite. Segment 1, The Mystery of the Stones. The sun rises over the southeastern highveld of modern-day Zimbabwe, casting golden light across an ancient site of awe and enigma. Nestled between rivers and plateaus lies Great Zimbabwe, a city of dry stone architecture and unspoken power. For centuries, it stood as a silent sentinel to southern Africa's past ignored, misattributed, and even denied by colonizers who could not imagine that Africans, unaided, had built such grandeur. Yet the stones speak. No mortar binds the walls, only precision, patience, and vision. Some rise over 10 meters high, enclosing sacred spaces and royal courts. The site, once home to as many as 20,000 people, was the political and spiritual nucleus of a powerful Bantu-speaking civilization. Segment 2, The Land that Birthed a Kingdom. Long before Great Zimbabwe rose, the region had been home to Iron Age peoples, cattle herders, farmers and metallurgists. By the 5th century CE, small chiefdoms were scattered across the savannas, tapping into rich mineral resources, gold, iron and copper, while practicing mixed agriculture and long-distance trade. It was around 1100 CE that a transformation began. A new polity emerged, centralized and ambitious. It capitalized on its environment-fertile soils, strategic trade routes and access to rivers. A new elite class arose, separating itself from commoners through ritual, architecture and symbols of wealth. Over the next 3 centuries, the Kingdom of Zimbabwe would become a regional powerhouse, drawing people and tribute from vast stretches of land. Segment 3, The Rise of Great Zimbabwe. At the heart of this kingdom was the city of Great Zimbabwe, a term derived from Zimbabwe, Shona for houses of stone. The city wasn't just a residence, it was a statement. It reflected a society that had moved from temporary wood and mud structures to monumental permanence. Construction began around 1100 CE, reaching its architectural zenith by the 14th century. The city was composed of 3 major areas. The hill complex, perched on a granite outcrop, was likely the first to be built and may have served as a royal residence or religious center. The Great Enclosure, with its famous conical tower, remains the largest ancient structure in sub-Saharan Africa. The valley ruins, containing houses and living quarters for elites and perhaps administrators. Each stone, chiseled and fitted without binding material, was laid with deliberate design. The curving walls and symbolic towers suggest ceremonial importance, possibly associated with fertility, lineage or divine kingship. Segment 4, A Culture of Abundance. The people of Great Zimbabwe were not isolated. They thrived through trade, agriculture and metallurgy. Archaeological excavations have uncovered glass beads from Persia, porcelain from China, and Arab coins, all testaments to an economy deeply enmeshed in the Indian Ocean trade network. The city's prosperity was grounded in 3 main pillars. 1. Cattle, the backbone of wealth and social status. Herds were symbols of prosperity and sources of milk, meat and hides. 2. Agriculture, millet and sorghum were staple crops, cultivated with iron tools that sustained the growing population. 3. Mining. Gold was the kingdom's lifeblood. The rivers of southeastern Africa yielded vast deposits, traded for exotic goods with Swahili merchants along the coast. Segment 5, A Kingdom's Reach. The Kingdom of Zimbabwe stretched far beyond its stone core. At its height, it influenced territories across modern Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Botswana, and South Africa. Its rulers controlled trade routes linking the interior to the Swahili city-states, particularly Sofala, the coastal port that served as a gateway to the world. Gold, ivory, and animal skins flowed eastward. In return came cloth, beads, ceramics, and ideas. Along these routes traveled not just goods, but spiritual beliefs, linguistic exchanges, and political ideals. Kings in Zimbabwe styled themselves as divine mediators between the ancestors and the living, consolidating both sacred and temporal power. Segment 6. Divine Kings and the Ritual Landscape. Power in the Kingdom of Zimbabwe was not merely political, it was spiritual. The king, known by some oral traditions as the Mombo, was not just a ruler but a mediator between the earthly and ancestral realms. His authority was sacred, steeped in ritual and reinforced through symbolism embedded in the very stones of the capital. The Great Enclosures architecture was more than functional, it was metaphoric. The massive conical tower, built entirely without mortar, may have symbolized male potency or the continuity of the royal bloodline. Surrounding curved walls enclosed open spaces likely used for rites or courtly gatherings. The city was a physical expression of cosmic order where stone and space encoded spiritual truths. Rituals were performed to maintain harmony between the living and the ancestors whose guidance and approval were essential for rainfall, fertility, and victory in war. Rainmakers, spirit mediums, and royal advisors formed a sacred hierarchy that governed alongside the king. The very hill of the Acropolis, home to the earliest structures, was considered a sacred place of origin and communion. Segment 7. The everyday lives of a stone kingdom. Beyond the walls of royalty and ritual, tens of thousands of people lived, worked, and thrived. The majority of the population lived in circular mud and thatch houses clustered in the valley, surrounding the monumental centers. Archaeological remains reveal a highly organized urban environment: stone platforms for cooking, clay spindle whirls for textile production, and iron slag heaps from smithing workshops. Women likely played vital roles in weaving, pottery, food preparation, and possibly as spiritual figures in lineage rites. Men herded cattle, hunted, and worked iron or gold. Children helped with farming and household duties while absorbing the oral traditions that kept history alive. Society was stratified but interconnected, a complex network of lineage, patronage, and clan relationships defined roles and responsibilities. Though elites enjoyed access to foreign goods and lived within or near the stone enclosures, social cohesion was maintained through clan rituals, festivals, and storytelling traditions. Segment 8. Artistry in stone and clay. The Kingdom of Zimbabwe produced not just massive structures but elegant crafts. Pottery was highly developed, with decorative motifs incised or painted onto vessels. Patterns, zigzags, chevrons, and herringbones mirrored the geometric beauty of stone walls. Such designs carried symbolic meaning, representing water, fertility, or ancestral paths. Ironsmiths forged tools, weapons, and ornamental items. Goldsmiths, though little of their work survives, must have crafted jewelry and adornments for elites, as evidenced by beads and artifacts found in royal graves and distant markets. Perhaps the most iconic symbol of Great Zimbabwe is the soapstone bird. 8 statues of these birds carved with abstract, almost spiritual dignity were found atop pillars within the hill complex, believed to represent totemic clan animals or divine messengers. They remain national symbols of modern Zimbabwe today. Segment 9. Trade winds and global ties. Despite its inland location, the Kingdom of Zimbabwe was part of a cosmopolitan trade web that linked sub-Saharan Africa with the Indian Ocean world. From the gold mines of the interior, caravans transported wealth eastward to ports like Sofala. From there, Arab dhows carried goods to Arabia, India, and China. This trade was not merely transactional, it was transformative. Imported textiles, ceramics, and glass beads altered fashions and tastes. Foreign ideas and technologies filtered in, enriching local practices. Swahili-speaking intermediaries, descendants of Arab, Persian, and African intermarriages acted as brokers of goods and culture, bringing news of distant lands and reinforcing Zimbabwe's global stature. Segment 10. Decline. In the stone shadows, by the mid-15th century, the radiance of Great Zimbabwe began to dim. The reasons for its decline are still debated, but likely included a combination of environmental, political, and economic factors. Overgrazing and deforestation may have depleted local resources, A changing climate marked by droughts could have undermined agriculture and cattle herding, shifting trade routes and the rise of competing centers like Kome to the west diluted Zimbabwe's monopoly on commerce internally. Royal succession disputes or fragmentation of clan alliances may have weakened central authority. By around 1450 CE, Great Zimbabwe was largely abandoned, its stones left to weather under African skies. Yet even as the city fell silent, its cultural legacy endured. Successor states adopted similar architecture, political structures, and cosmologies. The memory of stone grandeur lived on in oral traditions, which preserved the glory of the ancestors, who built with earth, iron, and spirit. Segment 11. Colonial denial and historical reclamation. For centuries after its abandonment, Great Zimbabwe remained revered among local communities as a sacred site, associated with rain spirits and ancestral presence. But when European colonists arrived in the late 19th century, they could not accept that Africans had built such a sophisticated city. Early European explorers and archaeologists advanced theories that Phoenicians, Arabs, or even biblical figures like King Solomon must have constructed the site. These racist assumptions were enshrined in colonial policies, textbooks, and museum labels. Local voices were silenced, and African ingenuity was erased from official history. It was only in the mid-20th century through the courageous work of African and progressive archaeologists that the truth emerged. Great Zimbabwe was undeniably African, built by Bantu-speaking peoples with immense skill, organization, and vision. Today, it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and the namesake of the modern nation of Zimbabwe, a powerful act of historical reclamation. Segment 12, Sacred Enclosures, the role of spirituality in stone. Amid the towering dry stone walls and curving granite corridors of Great Zimbabwe, one truth whispered across the ages. This was no mere citadel of commerce or kingship. The Kingdom of Zimbabwe was also a sacred landscape where stone and spirit intertwined. The iconic conical tower within the great enclosure, with no entrance and no obvious purpose, has intrigued archaeologists and spiritual scholars alike. Was it a symbol of fertility, a grain silo turned into metaphor, or perhaps a totem to the ancestors, whose spirits guided the fate of the kingdom? What is clear is that spiritual practice was inseparable from architecture. The placement of walls, the winding passages, and the restricted inner sanctums were not merely defensive or practical. They reflected cosmological order. The Shona people, descendants of the kingdom's inhabitants, have long practiced a religion centered on ancestral veneration and spirit mediums Svikiro. At Great Zimbabwe, the layout of spaces suggests zones of ritual, performance, and private communion with the spirits. Sacred hills around the city were believed to house the spirits of ancient leaders and guardians. Offerings of pottery, iron tools, and cattle bones found near these highlands point to acts of reverence. Rainmaking ceremonies, crucial in a land where agriculture depended on timely seasons, may have taken place near these heights, blending ecological dependence with spiritual obligation. Segment 13, Stonework in Silence, the Builder's Legacy. What makes Great Zimbabwe extraordinary is not merely the size of its structures, but the skill with which they were built without mortar. Layer upon layer of perfectly shaped granite blocks fit together in sweeping curves and towers that have stood for centuries. The stones themselves were quarried nearby and painstakingly shaped with iron tools, reflecting a mastery of masonry that rivaled that of contemporaneous civilizations, far beyond Africa's shores. Yet we know almost nothing about the individuals who built these monuments. Their names are lost, their voices silent. Were they artisans conscripted by the state, priestly masons engaged in sacred labor, or free citizens taking part in the construction of their shared cultural identity? The absence of written records has often been cited to diminish African civilizations, but the stones of Zimbabwe speak in their own language of geometry, harmony, and time. Their enduring presence is a record, even if it is not written with ink. Segment 14 echoes across the plateau, the kingdom's network. The Kingdom of Zimbabwe was not an isolated marvel. It was the crowning node in a web of interconnected settlements stretching across southern Africa, from smaller stone-walled sites like Kome and Lodlo to distant trade outposts along river systems and coastlines. Some of these centers, post-dating Great Zimbabwe, seem to have inherited and adapted its political and architectural models. This diffusion challenges older notions that the collapse of Great Zimbabwe around 1450 marked the end of its cultural legacy. Rather, its essence scattered like seeds sprouting in other centers that carried its memory forward. In many ways, Great Zimbabwe was not an endpoint, but a transmitter, a cultural ancestor whose ideas echoed through time. Segment 15, Collapse or Transformation, the Fate of Great Zimbabwe. Around the mid-15th century, Great Zimbabwe began to decline. The reasons are still debated: environmental degradation from overgrazing and deforestation, shifts in trade routes, or internal political fragmentation. What is certain is that the site was gradually abandoned. The capital moved north to the Kingdom of Mutapa, where rulers claimed descent from the Zimbabwean dynasties, continuing some of its cultural patterns. But unlike many fallen capitals that are forgotten or erased, Great Zimbabwe remained venerated. Oral traditions preserved its memory, pilgrimages continued, and even as grasses overtook stone, the sacred still clung to the granite ruins. Segment 16, A Monument Misunderstood, Colonial Myths and Modern Truths. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, as European colonizers entered southern Africa, they encountered the ruins of Great Zimbabwe with disbelief and denial. Many European scholars and settlers refused to believe that black Africans could have constructed such grandeur. Wild theories emerged. It must have been built by Phoenicians, Arabs, even a lost tribe of Israel. These ideas were rooted not in evidence, but in racist assumptions. Archaeological investigations in the 20th century, especially by scholars like David Randall Meekiver and later Peter Garlake, proved conclusively that Great Zimbabwe was built by ancestors of the modern Shona people. Yet for decades, colonial regimes suppressed these findings. Fearful of empowering African heritage narratives, the site became a battleground of identity. Its name Zimbabwe was adopted by the nation after independence in 1980, reclaiming the legacy. Today, it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a national symbol, appearing on currency, the flag, and in the very name of the country. Segment 17, The Enduring Voice of Stone. Great Zimbabwe is not just ruins, it is revelation. Its walls enclose not only ancient kings and caravans, but timeless ideas. That architecture can be memory, that trade can be diplomacy, that belief can be built into stone. It reminds us that Africa was never a dark continent, it was lit by its own civilizations. The legacy of the Kingdom of Zimbabwe lives on in the languages spoken, the art practiced, the rhythms danced, and the stories told by the descendants of those who once walked its corridors. And even now, as the sun sets behind its western wall, the stone seems to breathe, whispering the dreams of builders who carved permanence from earth.